Well, hey everybody, Pastor Steve here. We've come to the middle of another week. Today we are in Romans chapter 13. I hope you've already read this chapter. The verses that I want to talk about that because they spoke to my heart when I was reading this, it starts at verse 8. Excuse me, verse 8, where Paul writes, "Owe nothing to anyone except to love one another. For he who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law." That's reminiscent, of Jesus saying that loving God with all your heart and so on, and loving your neighbor as yourself. If you do that, you fulfill the law and the commandments, the prophets of the Old Testament. Paul's saying essentially the same thing, that if you know how to love people, then you're obeying all of the Scripture. For this, verse 9, "For this you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. And if there is any other commandment, it is summed up in this saying, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." In other words, if you love your neighbor, then you're not going to commit adultery against that person, murder that person, steal from that person, covet what that person has. And any other commandment of Scripture, if you love your neighbor, you're not going to violate that commandment in your dealings with that neighbor. In verse 10, he adds, "Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law." Now, in Jesus' day, you remember someone asked him, "Who's my neighbor?" And Jesus answered that with the parable of the Good Samaritan and made the point that essentially your neighbor is anyone you encounter who has a need, anyone you encounter whom you can serve and help in some particular way. And love means I don't hurt them. I don't do them wrong. So, when you commit adultery, you are hurting someone. When you steal, you are hurting someone. When you murder, obviously, you hurt someone. When you covet, you hurt someone, because that covetousness shapes you, which will in turn shape how you relate to and deal with the other person. He says essentially love does no wrong, no harm to your neighbor. And Jesus said your neighbor is anybody you encounter, essentially. But it is also true that your neighbor is your actual neighbor. It's the person who lives in the house, on the street, in the cul-de-sac, in the neighborhood. It's the person who works in the cubicle on the same floor as you. It's the student who sits at a desk in the classroom where you go to school. On and on we go. It's those that we are in close proximity to, and that you and I are to be intentional about loving them, serving them, helping them, not hurting them. I want to share with you that in 2022, going into 2023, our church, First Baptist Rock Hill, will be a pilot church working with our South Carolina Baptist Convention's evangelism team in the area of neighboring. We're going to be training our church family in an evangelistic philosophy called neighboring. How you develop relationships with, pray for, care for, and serve, and share the gospel with neighbors who are not followers of Christ. And yes, that will include your neighborhood where you live, but the neighboring process, the neighboring principle applies to where you work, where you go to school, and on any social unit that you are part of. And I want you to go ahead and put on your calendar February 27, that's a Sunday. That morning, we are going to provide 1 hour of training. It's kind of an overview, if you will, of the neighboring ministry, the neighboring process, philosophy, approach to being a witness for Jesus. And then in the months to come after that, we will do more detailed training on the different parts of neighboring, on the developing the relationship, the praying for your neighbors, the sharing with your neighbors. So more training to come. But we want you to be in on the ground level when we give the overview training on Sunday, February 27. You'll hear more about that in the days to come, but I hope you'll put that on your calendar, because one of the ways you love your neighbor, not just by not hurting them, but by helping them, by sharing Jesus, by loving them, and we want to help you know how to do that. It's a great way to be a witness for Jesus in today's culture, so I hope you'll join us on February 27th. Hey, God bless you, and I'll see you tomorrow.